Thank you, everyone, for being here. Muchas gracias. Thank you, too, to our friends in Zoom. I was hoping I would see them all in like a little column to the side of the screen, but I do have people that I know that are in Zoom, and so I really appreciate you all being here. Let me just make sure that this is fine, that you can hear me. Okay, great. And so the purpose of this talk is to share with you how anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion have inspired the development of this certificate in data science for social impact and continue to inspire it. They have shaped the way in which the curriculum is developed. And so I will definitely appreciate all the questions, the comments that you might have at the end of the talk, because we know that this is work that has to, we have to learn from it day by day. We have a huge task in front of us, all of us, and so I want to mention that this is joint work. So I'm learning a lot from you as well as I share this with you. So I think we've all been, maybe through a loved one or directly, have benefited from the increase in data technologies, especially seeing that a tumor is detected early on just because of better medical imaging, makes us all very hopeful for the use of data technologies, not just in medicine, but in other realms. And that excitement has permeated at some point to social services, with the belief that finally with data and objective use of data, we will be able to address the needs of society and people that fall through, no blame on their own, that fall through the cracks and need support. So in homelessness, housing instability, mental health issues, and yet I think it comes as not as a surprise to you. We know that there's been incredible problems when trying to apply data technologies to address social issues. For instance, an algorithm that screens for child neglect could harden racial disparities. This is very recently, it's a very controversial use of data technologies to decide whether a report of child neglect or maltreatment gets addressed or gets investigated. We know that also the decision-making in allocating health services to people that have been aided by algorithms sometimes have led to, without knowing, excluding a large group of participants, particularly Black patients, within a same insurance system from services that were preventive. That, in that case, thankfully, there was an analysis that allowed to identify that problem. This was an algorithm that had not used race as a variable in the process, and yet by other circumstances, because society carries racism, which then leads to data that carries this segregation, led to those really biased results. And then we also have an example with police data. Again, predictive policing has been so controversial and clearly skewed towards people of color. So what do we do with this? Do we say no to data algorithms? This is all, they carry the biases found in society, and so it's going to be, always problematic. And what we have done here at the Mandel School is to learn from the past to influence that future. And I think, more and more it's really exciting to see that nascent scholarship in social science, in public health, are looking back and are trying to address these issues. So our certificate, and we have, thank you, Richard Sig in the audience who can tell you a little bit more about the application process. But what I can tell you is it is a 12-credit digitally certified certificate offered jointly by our school and the School of Engineering here at CASE. I'm really excited to work with our colleagues in engineering, and they are also excited to work with us, with a point of integrating community knowledge into data science to advance social justice within an ethical framework. Maybe that would be kind of in a nutshell what we're doing. And why integrate community knowledge? How is that going to address ADEI? How is that going to maybe prevent our misuse of data? Well, it turns out that a lot of the data science, the techniques that we use also in social sciences, are really a sum of two things: data and assumptions. So the statistical models that we apply to data are really informed by a set of assumptions, and the question is, whose assumptions are those? Are these ones that the researcher, kind of decided that they would be applicable to understanding this data? The examples that I presented in the previous slide all had wrong assumptions about the behaviors of people marginalized in society. And because of those misinformed assumptions, they were missing either people that should have received medical services, homeless services, or they were targeting people with these police algorithms. So we think that it's really important to use information from experiential knowledge, community knowledge, at the very beginning, not at the end to interpret results, but rather at the very beginning. And so that is how our curriculum is structured, with 4 classes that can be taught, can be attended in person or remote. The first 2 classes, so you see the 2 in red are the Mandel Schools classes, and the green ones are the ones offered in engineering. The green classes, exploratory data science and modeling and prediction, are both obvious, as their names indicate. They're going to teach us about the tools, the data techniques, the modeling techniques, the exploratory visualization, and that is important, right? But those tools are not enough. What we want to do is frame it with a framework to integrate community knowledge, experiential knowledge, and historical knowledge of historical processes in it. That is, we explore a number of areas of social work, and under this framework, in the first class, the Introduction to Data Science for Social Impact, and in that second semester, we have a chance to implement it fully through a analysis of data, where, as I said, we go through the, now empowered with the tools and that framework, we can implement it in a project of our choice. So the presentation today is going to be mainly about that framework and how we set up the sequence. So that's SAS 471, which we are actually teaching this coming semester. I should say too that if you want to, as a student you would like to just take that class for general reference, that is good. And also that this is geared to anyone with a bachelor's degree that might have had a class in statistics. We do have a boot camp in the summer for a review of those statistical background, but it is not meant to make another data scientist out of us, rather to empower the data science building blocks with knowledge that you bring that to the table. So I said looking back to the past, and this was an opportunity for me to learn. I continue to learn about the past and how it informs our future, and continue to be inspired by this. Our former dean, Dr. Sharon Milligan, once called for a book club, invited us to a book club to read The Condemnation of Blackness by Dr. Khalil Gibran Mohammed. At the time, I was reading the Book of Why, The New Science of Cause and Effect, by Judea Pearl, computer scientist Judea Pearl. And I thought, these two things go together in a beautiful way, because both challenge this idea that data speaks for themselves and point to a much better understanding of data if it is informed by knowledge, historical knowledge of the society, of the way in which discrimination shapes that. And Pearl provides beautiful, simple graphical tools in which we can make those assumptions explicit. And we can all, as a community, kind of challenge those assumptions before we start interpreting data. So I'll just read a note from this book. The invisible layers of racial ideology packed into the statistics, sociological theories, and the everyday stories we continue to tell about crime in modern urban America are a legacy of the past. The choice about which narratives we attach to the data in the future, however, is ours to make. So what narratives do we attach to the data? And then Pearl, at a recent interview, he says, data alone are hardly a science, no matter how big. He actually says big data are dumb data. But in this interview, he refrained himself. And no matter how big they get and how skillfully they are manipulated. So again, the idea of when we use a causal graph to set up our assumptions, to clarify them and share them, then that, along with data, might be able to be more powerful. I want to say that it was painful, it was instructive, and it was inspiring to read The Condemnation of Blackness. And I have gone through it a number of times because of the class that we developed social data analysis and racism then and now. But most of all, I would say it was inspiring, and it allowed us to meet not only well, not in person yet, Dr. Khalil Gibran Mohammed, right there in the center, but also amazing people that lived in the early 1900s up until, well, people that lived until just a few years ago, continue to live, and that have used data in a different way. They challenged the way in which social science scholars that at the time in 1930, 40, and 50 were on the podiums of the academies, the national academies. These scholars and activists challenged the way in which data was used. They did not say, okay, data is not useful because it stems from a racialized society. They use data to challenge the flaws in logic that scholars had. And so that to me was incredibly inspiring and revealing. Ida B. Wells, mathematician Kelly Miller, Fannie Williams, an activist who said, at the time when there was unfortunately a term for the study of racism, it was called the Negro problem, and she very smartly pointed, that is not the problem. The problem is, how does one navigate a system that has so many barriers, that seems really so crazy, right? And of course, as we know, Du Bois as well. So there was much to learn from looking at the past, and only very recently in 2020, 2021, and 22 is that the American Economic Association, the Association of Social Workers, the American Psychological Association, present some statements of recognizing their lack of knowledge, their lack of understanding, sometimes their apologies of the harm performed. So this is just to say the things that I learned in statistics, that we learn in our statistics classes, if detached from the clarifying where those assumptions come for the models we run, we're not advanced in social justice, we're not advanced in ADEI when we omit them. Many of us, if we have, ever had to run a regression and we include a variable that classifies people by the social construct of race, what do we mean by that? Have we, spent some time questioning the way in which it is used? And as a social worker, if you are working with a client and you enter those types of demographic characteristics, do we question what are they going to be used to? How are they going to inform our better performance as an agency? Sorry. So just want to make sure. So we are building resources using a public interest technology grant to to infuse this certificate with community knowledge to help students critically examine and challenge assumptions by integrating community knowledge at the very beginning, so that when they use administrative and publicly available data, they have a much more critical perspective on it, to identify and address bias in data analysis, in causal and predictive modeling, and then also to shape the analysis under principles of ethics and fairness. Our team is a nice, diverse group of community partners, community collaborators, people that with lived experiences that come not as a focus group participant, as a subject of research, but rather as a collaborator to inform our analysis of data. We have student collaborators and then faculty members from multiple schools. And this framework that I was referring to, FAIR, it stands for Frame, Articulate, Identify, and Report. Frame, we frame the data and we describe the metadata with historical context and experiential knowledge, for which we use these data chats that I'll explain a little bit about in the next slide. With that information, we articulate into causal graphs the questions, the research questions that we have, the hypotheses about the role of discrimination in the social issue being addressed. We take almost like a checklist approach to looking at each variable and trying to understand if there is any bias embedded in that variable or in the fact that maybe some observations are missing. Why are they missing? And then we report back. So originally the framing of the data uses experiential knowledge. So our subject matter experts are people with lived experiences whose data is represented. And so then we report back to this group, to members of the community or agencies that can give us feedback. It's not just about reporting at an academic conference, as much as that is still very important. So one example that we are currently exploring is the recertification of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. SNAP, as you might know, it's one of the largest programs, social service programs in the United States, and it's been analyzed using administrative data multiple times. The thing is that every 6 months or every year, people that qualify have to recertify again, and it has been shown that about half of those that are enrolled in SNAP, by the first year, half have already dropped. And half of those who have dropped apparently would still qualify. And so what's going on with the problem and the program and the process that makes people who qualify, who could, use another $100 for food, not be able to access that. So we embarked on this, the first part of the framework, F, with one of my partners of research, Emily Nelson is here with me. We have done these conversations with people. We have food, and we talk as if we would do in a sobremesa, in a just having lunch and then talking after lunch, right? And so we recognize that there's this data generating process, the administrative data that we see. They know much more about it than we do. So who entered the information you provided in the intake form when you were applying for recertification of SNAP? Were you offered an explanation for the need to ask the questions you were asked? Do you think this data is necessary to provide appropriate services? And so we engage in this discussion. We ask people for their advice. And that leads, as I said, to identification of important points coming from that experiential knowledge, such as an obsolete communication system, hours-long wait times on the phone, stressful verification process that seems confrontational, and really deep and profound thoughts that come from our participants, saying that these services should come from a sense of mutual trust. The natural state of humans is cooperation. If you're being combative, everyone reacts viscerally. They don't have enough people to intake, so you're discouraging people from applying. When you set a goal and you try to make it and you fail, that's how I feel. It's a defeated feeling. There's nothing I can do, nobody who can help you. So it's kind of sounds a little strange that we go from those important thoughts to a graphical model, but I just want to point here two things. So this very simple model that you have here, where FR is failure to recertify, would be analyzed in the standard way, where we put multiple variables in a model and we predict, is that person at risk to fail recertification? Where race is just one more variable that we unquestionably enter in this model. That other graph comes from thinking about the historical processes that shape discrimination, that then impact the contemporary policies that allocate scarce resources through the social safety net, so that's CP. The way in which, rather than race, we have MG there, the classification into a marginalized group that then leads to stigmatization, and that leads to a number of other factors like poverty, time and resource scarcity that ultimately affect failure to recertify. The point being is that if we see the system in a more realistic way, informed by experiential knowledge, we're going to be much more careful when we analyze variables, like the model using just race as a variable, and in the way in which we not only set up models but interpret results. I'll just very quickly say that we do learn also from going step by step on that checklist to identify, this is FAI, identify potential biases in the data, missing data patterns, and the reporting is yet to come because we are meeting with our data chat participants in a couple of weeks, and so we will see how things go with them. But in general, in this first class, we cover and analyze the literature, very recent literature, on the use of force by police, incarceration and bail, child welfare, homeless services, health services, and recently with our work on housing and lead effects research. We allow students to focus on their interests any areas in which data technologies are being used for decision making to improve social services is something that we allow students to take on. I also want to point out that just like I had this beautiful picture of scholars, activists that are less, that are not surfaced in our knowledge of contributions to social sciences, and yet should be. Today, young and alive, we have amazing Black scholars as well. I have drawn, and my colleagues and I have drawn for this work on two important groups of scholars in epidemiology, pointing to teaching yourself about structural racism will improve your machine learning. Recommendations for using causal diagrams to study racial health disparities. So we're really excited to see that this is work that others, are also developing. And when it comes to touching on issues that are so important and so personal, and when I say personal, I mean every one of us, right? In a society wherever we are, and not necessarily in the United States, but where there is marginalization of people, then I think that it's really helpful to draw from the literature, to draw from the arts. So I wanted to, you can read in case, it's not, the audio isn't the best, but this is one of my heroes, Wynton Marsalis, trumpetist and I would say philosopher. So here he goes. This was years ago when he was asked about race, and this was for a jazz documentary by Ken Burns.
Well, race is race is like, for this country, it's like the thing in the story, in the mythology, that you have to do for the kingdom to be well. And it's always something you don't want to do. And it's always that thing that's so much about you confronting yourself that is tailor-made for you to fail dealing with it. And the question of your heroism and of your courage and of your success at dealing with this trial is, can you confront it with honesty? And do you confront it, and do you have the energy to sustain an attack on it?
So I leave you with the courage that Wynton Marsalis inspires us to follow,